Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us this morning. I just want to follow up. There was one comment that was made about the notion of wanting to avoid embedding bias. And Mr. Dummett, I'm going to follow up with you. I mean, you had talked about how critically important the peer review system is. And you actually appeared in November 28th of 2024. And you had mentioned federal funding agencies, federal research agencies, and the Canada Research Program are at the moment ignoring the single biggest and most egregious diversity problem in higher education. And that is the notion of viewpoint diversity. And then you went on to mention, I think that the lack of viewpoint diversity significantly damages the purpose of higher education, which I greatly support. So how can viewpoint diversity advance research excellence in Canada?
Thanks for the question. And I would like to say, I suppose I said something similar to the first and third witnesses as well, talking about, at its best point, peer review depends on a wide range of experts assessing the material for what it is, and if you don't have a diverse viewpoint, then it's a significant problem. You're not getting an actual complete analysis of the material, and in reality, right now, that's not happening in the university sector. The Canada Research Chairs Program, the federal funding agencies are essentially ignoring the reality that there's an incredible skew in who makes up the population of peer reviewers, of university researchers. It's not even, as far as I can tell, on the radar. And secondly, as I was saying, the second half of my comments, the current practices of EDI funding and other programs are actually making the political skew much worse.
You went on, and there was a quote from your previous testimony, and I bring it up again because unfortunately during that day of hearings, there were a lot of technical issues, so a lot of testimony was missed at certain periods. So I just wanted to follow up because I found it quite interesting. I mean, during that time, you actually quote John Stuart Mill, who said, "He who knows only his side of the case knows little." So, I mean, is viewpoint diversity right now a funding criteria by the tri-councils in federal research funding?
I don't believe it is. I don't see it there. Maybe there's someone who could see it. It certainly doesn't come up as a criteria in the training materials that I've seen. It doesn't seem to be an issue that when the panels are deciding who gets to assess this material, it's not a category which is being promoted by the Canada Research Chairs Program or federal funding agencies at all. Even despite the fact that as our research shows, the political skew in higher education is worse than really almost any other category of identity that the federal funding agencies are tracking.
That testimony on that day, Mr. Eric Kaufman also appeared, and he proposed a solution. And he talked about, I would like to see the councils get ahead of the problem and move to a colorblind merit approach. Remove political criteria such as mandatory diversity statements. These are not universal consensus values. They are partisan values, and every survey will show a big partisan gap on these questions. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I'd like to emphasize that I think it's a false choice between accounting for diversity and the way it's currently being operated. I think excellent research design, and here I'd agree with my fellow witnesses, excellent research design must account for the diversity of the population for different ways it will affect different parts of the population. I think it's a false choice between having EDI and not having EDI. I think research design has to account for that. But I think that the agencies must be aware of the way in which current policies are framed interprets and mandates and embeds a partisan interpretation of what EDI means in practice.
I think you're correcting that. I mean, going back to the statement of or the testimony of November 28th, we also had Dr. Jeremy Kerr, and he mentioned about diversity of views or diverse backgrounds. That's not to say it's not important. And he says when he's looking for people to include in my research group, the last thing I'm trying to do is make everybody like me. So that's critically important. But also, in terms of the whole viewpoint diversity, when we look at these projects, would you not agree?
I think it absolutely should be on the agenda. The problem is partly the pipeline. The problem is the population of professors is so skewed already that work should be done up and down the system to make sure that there's just a much wider range of Canadians, a much more representative range of Canadians who are recruited and hired as experts and as professors in the higher education system.
To that point, and just last question, you had mentioned in previous testimony that you said DEI policies often punish small institutions in underrepresented regions. Can you expand on that?
I'm trying to remember what I said there. Sorry if I can't recall exactly. I think, in a sense, if you're at a university like I am, Trent University, the CRC program, for example, wants the population of our Canada research chairs to represent the Canadian population. And if you look around the city of Peterborough, which is becoming more diverse, but it looks quite different than Toronto. It's just not. It's not. The community is different than it would be somewhere else. And I think maybe the kind of people who are willing to move here are slightly different. So if it's based at a kind of national level, then it's kind of skewing against a kind of communities. They're just different from the kind of wider national trends. Perhaps that's what I was referring to.
Thank you, and I think that's pretty well my time, right, Madam Chair? Thank you. I'll cede my time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are for Professor Dummett. Specifically, I want to talk about public trust. And we know that public trust has a lack of public trust in our public institutions amongst Canadians have been increasing throughout the years. And it's also correlated with the implementation of liberal top-down policies over the years, and it's no wonder it's also gone worse. And I think I read a report the other day that it's at an all-time high in 2025. The lack of public trust in our institutions is an all-time high amongst Canadians. So I just want you to expand on that generally, or specifically about in the settings of universities and colleges and the granting of federal funding.
Thanks. I should say, like a lot of my colleagues who are paying witnesses before you today, I want to live in a world where there's a high public trust in higher education and universities, and to allow us to do our work. But I think we all know that public trust is eroding in a series of institutions, from media to various claims of expertise. And the point of the testimony that I'm offering to you today is that while I don't want there to be a lack of public trust, I can sympathize and see why there is a lack of public trust, especially in the population of, say, 41% of the population who voted for the Conservative Party in the last election. As they listen to experts who show up in the Globe and Mail or the CBC or wherever tell them that there's a consensus on topic X or topic Y, pick your topic, what they can know is that the expertise is just not made up of a diverse array of people that represents their viewpoints. So just like a group of African Canadians might be skeptical of a group of experts who are only white, who are telling them what the truth is on a certain topic, I think it'd be crazy to think that the same would not also be true for these kinds of things. And obviously, we're living in a moment of a crisis of institutions more generally. On this problem, I think there are solutions that we can and should achieve.
And you think that lack of public trust is caused by a lack of viewpoints? Because you're like you said, when you have these so-called pundits that are so-called reflective of Canadians' viewpoints of a wide variety of spectrum, but they're not reflected, and Canadians feel like their viewpoints aren't represented in the public because of these biased panels that have a certain political skew. That's the term you used. What's the effect of that? Does that create more polarization amongst Canadians and also amongst our academic researchers as well? Does it also have an effect of radicalizing Canadians?
I think both things are true. I think it clearly is a contributing factor toward polarization. I think others would agree with that. And if you don't trust experts, if you don't trust the institutions that are supposed to be objective and if not neutral, at least diverse, to have a kind of rigorously go through material to tell you what is true, I think that's going to lead to polarization. It's going to lead to people to look for alternative viewpoints, some of which may be credible and many of which will not be credible. So I think higher education institutions have a duty, I would say, to really deal with this problem head on, see it as a major concern. And if I could just take 1 second to say, another witness mentioned that, in, say, business schools or engineering schools, the implication, I think, that this wasn't a problem. Our survey specifically looked at that, and I would say we expected that to be the case, but what we found is that it was not a significant difference, that the political skewed universities might vary slightly depending on the discipline, but it is, as I said, 88% of a representative sample of professors from across the country identify as on the left.
Yeah, and that's a lack of viewpoint diversity, and it's really troubling because the point of EDI, the D stands for diversity, and you would expect a diversity of viewpoints to come into things like business and social science, and where a diversity of viewpoints may enhance the research because you may catch things that you may not be able to catch were it not for the diversity of viewpoints. So it seems quite hypocritical and quite ironic, to be fair. And do you think that these DEI policies are potentially exclusionary and because of all the quotas that they're setting and create some kind of censorship, self-censorship and suppression of opposing views? Do you think it has that kind of effect?
I think in practice it does. I don't think it's intended to do that. I want to emphasize, I don't think the policies are intended to do that. But in practice, what happens, as I was saying in my testimony, is that it embeds a certain version of EDI in the criteria, so that scholars know that they if they believe in a kind of colorblind approach to dealing with discrimination, that just like an orchestra, you would put people behind a barrier, they would play their instrument, and people would acknowledge them for the skill they have.
Sorry for interrupting. Time is up for Mr. Hu, so thank you.